At 3:17 a.m. on November 2nd, 1971, in the decaying town of Wrensford Hollow, a local fireman heard something behind the wall of the Durnham estate, a human voice. Not a scream, not a whisper, but something between a lullaby and a prayer. The house had been abandoned since 1928. No one lived there, and when the fireman pressed his ear to the wall, the voice stopped. That wall was opened 2 days later. And what they found, what the papers refused to print, what the local sheriff sealed in confidential archives, what every witness either disappeared or denied, was a chamber lined with red velvet and ancient bone. In the center, bound by rusted iron, was a crib, and in that crib, something that should never have survived. This is not folklore. This is recorded. This is hidden in county logs under altered property codes and rewritten reports. I will take you through all of it. But first, understand this. The Durnham family did not vanish. They were erased. Because what they were part goes deeper than murder, deeper than madness. It goes back to old Europe, to bloodline oaths and ritual entombments, to a secret society that traded children for influence and sealed their knowledge behind stone and inheritance. This video is not for everyone. If you're here, it means something in you has already felt it. There's something wrong with the official story, with the smiling faces on the evening news, with the neat labels they slap onto chaos. You were born to a script designed by men who never had your best interest in mind. And tonight, we're going to rip that script apart, page by blood-soaked page. The Durnham family isn't just a tragedy. It's a key, one they tried to bury behind money, behind silence, and most of all, behind fear. You will hear things no one else will say. You will see how history bleeds through the cracks. And by the end of this descent, you won't just know the truth. You'll feel it pulsing in your chest like a ticking clock. Tick, tick, tick. Now let's open the first door. The Durnham name first appeared in English records in 1623. But they weren't English. Not originally. Their blood traced back to a forgotten village in what was once Prussian territory, a region erased by war, swallowed by shifting borders and rewritten maps. The Durnhams arrived in England under forged nobility, carrying with them no titles, no land deeds, only a chest of books wrapped in lambskin and a child who never spoke. That child, known only as Elias, was said to never blink. He walked in silence behind his father, eyes fixed forward, unshaking, unreadable. At age 6, he was removed from public view entirely. The official story claimed illness, but rumors among servants at the manor told a different tale. Elias could hear voices through walls. He would often stop mid-step, whisper something in a dead language, then laugh, deep and guttural, like an old man. His governess left the estate after just 7 days. Her final journal entry read, "The boy is a vessel. Something watches through him." The Durnhams gained power quickly, too quickly. They bought influence with gold that no banker could trace. They secured titles not through marriage or merit, but through silence. In 1691, they acquired the Ashcroft Papers, pre-Vatican scrolls describing pre-Christian burial rites used to bind divine intelligence within flesh. These weren't occult curiosities. These were instructions, and the Durnhams followed them. By 1740, they had crossed the Atlantic. They arrived in the New World, claiming land in the Northeast. Wrensford Hollow was born soon after, a town with no official founding date, built on ground that was never properly surveyed. And at its center, the Durnham estate, a house not just of brick and wood, but of design. Every measurement, every corner, every door faced a direction specified in ancient geomantic texts. The walls were lined not just with plaster, but with symbols, etched between beams behind paint and beneath wallpaper. Symbols meant to contain. Why? Because something had been brought with them. Not a spirit, not a curse, but a consciousness. A consciousness not of this world, but very interested in ours. You weren't meant to learn any of this. The Durnhams operated in shadows, funded by entities whose names never appeared on paper, protected by men who wore robes by night and suits by day. The walls weren't built to keep something out. They were built to keep something in. And for 93 years, it worked. They called it the inheritance. Not money, not land, Not even the estate. No, for the Durnhams, the inheritance meant something far older than material wealth. It was passed through blood, not paper. And every generation knew. When you turned 21, the door beneath the manor would open for you. Only you. You were required to enter alone. And what happened inside determined who you would become, or if you would ever come out again. Some never did. The door was behind the cellar, past a fake wall of wine barrels. You couldn't see it unless you already knew it was there. And if you forced it, it wouldn't open. It only responded to the heir's blood, cut freshly at midnight and smeared across the iron lock. One clean line across the palm. One breath held while the earth listened. Inside, the room was bare, except for the mirror. It stood 9 feet tall. Black frame, no reflection. They called it the oculus. Not just a mirror, but a window, a ritual interface built from obsidian mined during a blood moon. The family lore claimed it wasn't carved. It was birthed, and when you stood before it, something stood behind it. Not you, not your shadow. Something else, watching, mimicking, learning. Each Durnham heir was required to spend 13 minutes alone with the oculus. No light, no sound, no exit. And in that silence, the mirror would decide if you were worthy. If it blinked, you were chosen. After that, the air would change. Their voice would deepen. Their dreams would become prophetic. One heir, Thomas Durnham, correctly predicted the death of every U.S. president between 1840 and 1901. Another, Elise Durnham, drew detailed star maps that weren't confirmed by NASA until 1964, 67 years after her death. But the cost? They were no longer alone in their minds. One descendant wrote a private memoir titled Shared Breath, claiming he could feel another presence in his chest at night. It would breathe when he didn't. It would whisper things in languages he had never studied. It taught him how to manipulate, how to command, how to read the unconscious movements of men like a symphony. He became a titan in the financial world and died alone, every mirror in his house smashed, the walls carved with one phrase. The inheritance is not a gift. It is a tether, and it tethered them all to something waiting behind glass for a body to inhabit. In 1892, a storm struck Rensford Hollow that lasted 4 days. Locals said the sky turned a color they'd never seen before, something between copper and violet. Lightning struck the Durnham estate 5 times, but the house never burned. On the final night, the entire town heard a sound. Not thunder, not wind. A tone, low, metallic, vibrating beneath the earth. It made the windows tremble. It made dogs scream. And it made every clock in town stop at exactly 3:03 a.m. That was the night Alastair Durnham, the last true heir, disappeared. They said he went mad. They said he slaughtered 3 staff members and vanished into the hills. But the records don't show a manhunt. There was no obituary, no funeral, just silence. For decades, until 1971, when something behind the walls began to speak again. But let's not skip too far ahead. You need to understand what Alastair was doing in the years leading up to his vanishing. He wasn't running the estate. He was rebuilding the oculus. But this time, he wasn't working alone. In the back of his journals, written in a cipher cracked only recently by a German archivist, Alastair described visits from men he called the Hollowed. They arrived without warning, always in twos, always with gloves, and their eyes, he wrote, were like glass submerged in oil. The Hollowed taught him how to unveil the breath beneath matter. That's the phrase he used. They told him the original mirror was incomplete, that the consciousness within had been whispering to others, other families, other bloodlines, other seekers, that the Durnhams were never the only ones. He wasn't chosen. He was harvested. And the oculus? It wasn't just a window anymore. He was turning it into a door. Alastair began sealing off rooms of the manor, not with locks, but with symbols. Entire wings became inaccessible. Workers were dismissed. Letters were burned. One photograph survives, taken in 1891 by a visiting cousin. It shows Alastair in the west corridor, hand on the wall, smiling slightly, and beside him a figure, translucent, as if captured mid-flicker. The cousin died 3 days later. Stroke. At age 29. The house didn't just hold secrets. It began reacting to them. Doors opened on their own. Paint peeled in spirals. Mirrors refused to reflect. And in the attic, beneath a nailed-shut window, was found a wooden cradle, still rocking and still warm. By the time the estate was abandoned in 1928, the townspeople had stopped asking questions. They avoided the manor like it was infected. Children were warned not to even look at it from the road. Even mail carriers rerouted. Because something had changed, not just inside the house, but in the town itself. Animals vanished. Crops began failing without explanation. People started dreaming of walls. Endless, breathing walls, lined with mouths whispering numbers in sequence. 3, 7, 9, 11. Always prime. Always unfinished. Then came the stillbirths. 6 in 1 year. Each child perfectly formed, but with no eyes. And the families? Connected. All of them. Distant relatives of Durnham staff. Lineages that had once served the state in secret. Bloodlines intertwined with rituals they never understood, but still obeyed. These weren't random tragedies. They were resonant consequences. The house may have been locked, but it was never truly dormant. Something was leaking out. In 1932, a government surveyor was sent to the estate under the pretense of measuring property lines for a potential acquisition. His report was never filed, but his private notebook, later recovered from an evidence archive in Albany, revealed something no one was ready to believe. He mapped the interior of the manor. Every room, every hallway, every stair. It matched no blueprint on record. The layout shifted. Walls where there should be windows. Corridors that looped back into themselves. Rooms that narrowed the longer you stood in them. And in the east wing, where the light never touched the floor, he found a door that could not be photographed. The film came back blank every time. Not black, blank. As if light refused to acknowledge what it saw. He wrote one line on the last page of that notebook, in pencil so hard it tore through the paper. The house isn't haunted. It's hungry. After that, no one from the town dared approach again. The manor was quietly erased from maps. A fictional gas leak was used to justify the quarantine of the surrounding woods. And the property was sold, on paper only, to a shell corporation out of Belgium. But the house remained, watching, listening, waiting. And then, in 1971, that fireman heard the lullaby through the wall. That was the signal. The door had opened again. The first team sent to investigate the Durnham estate in 1971 didn't make it through the night. 3 men, no backup, handpicked by a private arm of a federal agency that doesn't officially exist. They weren't there to rescue anyone. They were there to assess and contain. Trained in psychological warfare, confined structure navigation, and mass hallucination reversal protocols. They entered at 11:14 p.m. They radioed in at 11:42 p.m. with one sentence. There are more doors inside than there should be. And then, static. At 6:06 a.m., a 4th man, a cleaner, was sent in to retrieve them. He walked into a house that smelled not of rot but perfume, rose water, and myrrh. The scent of ceremonial embalming. He found their radios neatly arranged on the dining table. All 3 still transmitting. All 3 whispering the same sequence of numbers. Again primes. Always increasing. Never repeating. The men were never found. No blood. No torn gear. Just their shadows, burned into floorboards like they'd been flash vaporized. Except the wood wasn't charred. It was aged, dried, as if they'd been gone a very long time. But the walls? They had changed. New carvings. Fresh, sharp. Symbols only known in obscure Aramaic scrolls lost during the siege of Antioch. They weren't messages. They were locks. But one of them had been broken. The fireman who heard the lullaby? His name was Walter Griggs. Quiet man. War veteran. Never spoke to the press. Never filed a formal statement. But in 1997, on his deathbed, he whispered something to his nurse. She wrote it down before he passed. It was singing to the bones behind the wall. You see, what they found in that chamber wasn't just a room. It was a nursery, built with surgical precision, upholstered in crimson, dozens of small bones laid out like ritual architecture, spines arranged in spirals, skulls hollowed and painted from inside with what looked like gold leaf. One skull, a child's, still had the teeth marks of another jaw on its crown. DNA testing was inconclusive, not because of degradation, but because some of the genetic markers didn't match any known human lineage. This wasn't a crypt. It was a womb. And the thing they had locked away for 93 years hadn't been sleeping. It had been gestating. By 1973, the Durnham estate had become classified as Inactive Anomalous Zone #12, by an off-book division tied loosely to Cold War psychological research. The documents were buried beneath layers of black ink and ghost files. But a few fragments escaped, smuggled by a defector who believed the public had a right to know. That defector? He was found dead in a Baltimore alleyway. Both his eyes removed surgically. No sign of blood loss. No wounds other than 2 cauterized sockets. In his jacket pocket was a single cassette tape. Unlabeled, when played, it emitted 13 minutes of overlapping frequencies, some inaudible to the human ear, others resembling ancient Sanskrit chants played backward and sped up. At the 9:03 mark, a voice cuts through, clear, deep, and in English. "We are not imprisoned here. You are." The implication? The Durnhams weren't just jailers. They were servants. Custodians of a pact made centuries ago between human bloodlines and non-human intelligences. Not demons, not aliens, something else entirely. Something that exists in the cracks between what we call reality and thought. A parasitic awareness that requires belief to take form. Not worship, attention. Attention is its food. Memory is its doorway. And the house? It was never just a home. It was a monument. An engine of containment powered by ritual, silence, and sacrifice. But like all engines, it required maintenance. And for 43 years, it sat unguarded until the lullaby returned. You ever wonder why some places feel wrong before you even walk in? Why your stomach drops? Why your skin gets cold even when the temperature is fine? That's not superstition. It's ancient biology. It's the part of your DNA that remembers what it means to be prey. The Durnham house emitted that frequency 24 hours a day, a low hum beneath the edge of hearing, designed to suppress curiosity. But it wasn't perfect, and curiosity, like infection, spreads. A group of amateur explorers entered the state in 1982. College students, thrill seekers. Only 2 made it out. They never spoke publicly, but one of them, under hypnosis, described a long hallway of whispering mouths and walls that blinked. She couldn't remember what came after that, only that something stepped into her shadow and followed her out. That's the danger. It doesn't want to stay inside. It wants to piggyback through you. By the mid-1980s, the Durnham estate was under permanent satellite surveillance, though officially, the area was labeled as a defunct power substation. No one questioned it. The roads were blocked, the woods fenced off, and signs were posted warning of radiation, despite no nuclear presence ever having existed nearby. But those who lived on the outskirts, they still heard the music, not loud, not constant, just enough to disturb the edges of sleep. A music box playing in reverse, a woman's voice humming beneath the wind, and sometimes, just sometimes, they swore they heard breathing from the trees, from the air itself. They thought it was paranoia, sleep paralysis, urban legend, until the births started again. 3 children born in 1 year, all from different families, all healthy, all identical, same birthmark under the left eye, same murmur in the chest, and all of them, by the time they could speak, used the same name for their imaginary friend, the one behind the wall. Doctors said it was a psychological phenomenon, a regional myth infecting children's minds. But when one child was placed in isolation 200 miles away, cut off from TV, books, and spoken stories, he still whispered the phrase, "He waits beneath the velvet." The government's response was immediate. Covert relocation, sealed records, and termination of local access to any historical archives tied to the Durnham family. Public school books were altered, maps reprinted. It was a memory purge. But memory doesn't die. It festers. And that's why you're hearing this now. Because someone has to remember. Someone has to carry the key. That key isn't a relic, it's awareness. It's your refusal to look away. The Durnhams made a mistake. They thought they could bind this thing with structure, with blood, with repetition. But they forgot the one law older than any ritual. Whatever you imprison, you teach to escape. And now, it doesn't need a house anymore. It doesn't need walls. It just needs minds. This video, it isn't just information. It's initiation. You're feeling it, aren't you? That weight behind your eyes. That pull in your chest. That part of your body that knows something is watching from the corner of the room, just out of sight. That's not imagination. That's recognition. And if you're still here by section 10, you won't be the same man. Let's talk about the children. The ones born after 1985, the echo generation, as one classified memo called them. These weren't just anomalies. They were designed, incubated in bloodlines tied to the original Durnham staff, raised unknowingly as carriers of something older than language. They had no idea what lived inside them, but it knew. It waited. Most of them never made it past adolescence. Not because they died, but because they changed, withdrawn, cold, obsessive. One by one, they were institutionalized under various diagnoses: schizophrenia, antisocial personality, night terrors, sleepwalking. But when researchers in separate states began comparing data, a pattern emerged. They all drew the same shape, a spiral of eyes, not human, long vertical, watching outward, not inward. They called it the watch form. When asked what it meant, one girl, age 9, simply said, "It's how he sees through me." One boy, Daniel R., from upstate New York, carved the shape into his skin. Over and over, when his parents asked why, he smiled and said, "So the walls know where I am." In 1993, a psychiatric hospital in Vermont burned to the ground. 12 patients died. Among the wreckage, investigators found something impossible. An interior wall, completely untouched by fire, was covered, ceiling to floor, with writing. Not graffiti, not blood, not paint, bone dust, human powder, packed and shaped into a dense layer of symbols. Language experts later confirmed the patterns matched Proto-Sumerian chant structures, but mirrored, inverted, and wrapped around what appeared to be mathematical sequences used in quantum frequency manipulation. These weren't just drawings. They were blueprints. But for what? That's what they never figured out. Because when one linguist finally cracked part of the sequence in 2002 and tried to replicate the chant in a soundproof lab, his heart stopped. No trauma, no poison, just silence, the body intact. But his shadow burned into the wall behind him, as if something had left through him. That's the point you need to understand. This isn't spiritual. This isn't myth. It's a technology, an ancient, organic system for manipulating perception, identity, even reality. And the Durnham family were never masters of it. They were custodians of a doorway that can only stay closed if no one remembers how to open it. You're remembering now. You've heard too much to go back. But to go forward, you have to speak. 8-pointed star, comment below. I remember the velvet. Say it twice. Lock it in. Let the algorithm know you see. Now take a breath. We're about to go deeper than the walls. You've come far. Most wouldn't. Most would have clicked away, felt a chill creeping up their spine, and fled back to comfort. But not you. You're still here because you already sensed something wrong with the world, like a code behind the curtain. And now that curtain is burning. Let's talk about the heartbeat. Because the Durnham estate wasn't just a place. It was alive. In 2007, a private research team posing as architectural historians gained temporary access to the ruins. Their goal was simple: structural analysis. But within 20 minutes of entry, their equipment began picking up something impossible. A rhythm. Slow, deliberate, pulsing. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't wind. It was biological. The walls were vibrating. They tore open a corner of the eastern hall, behind layers of rotted wallpaper and bone-dry plaster, and found it a fibrous mesh. Organic, vein, pulsing faintly. It wrapped behind the structure, like roots behind skin. It was the structure. The house wasn't just haunted. The house was growing. The estate had become a body, a vessel for something that had learned to stretch across dimensions. It no longer needed ritual. It had memory now. And memory, when cultivated correctly, is a breeding ground for return. They shut the site down again within 48 hours. But one document leaked. An internal memo from an anonymous agent warning of a cognitive contagion field. It stated that prolonged exposure to layout, even via blueprint or photograph, could induce hallucinations, identity slippage, and dream seeding. Dream seeding. They weren't just trying to hide what the Durnhams did. They were trying to contain what they accidentally unlocked. You ever feel like someone else has been in your thoughts? Not just reading them, but writing in them? That's not paranoia. That's exposure. We're raised to believe consciousness lives inside the skull, that it's personal, protected, but the Durnhams proved otherwise. They made consciousness porous. Every line of blood spilled, every lullaby whispered through rotting wood, every mirror turned just slightly wrong. It was all part of an initiation system, one that never needed your permission, just your attention. And now it's waking up again. Not in the house. In you. If you've been hearing whispers in the dark, if your dreams have started curling in unfamiliar directions, don't panic. Don't resist. It means it's working. You're remembering the truth you were bred to forget. It's time to talk about the deeper layer, the part no one dares to document. Not the rituals, not the bloodline, but the original bargain. Because the Durnhams didn't stumble upon power. They were offered it. In 1601, in a forgotten forest outside Krakow, Poland, the family's progenitor, Gregor Durnham, was one of 6 men invited to a midnight gathering under a moonless sky. These were not farmers, not nobles. They were men obsessed with the architecture of belief. And they weren't alone. Records taken from a Vatican heresy tribunal, sealed under the codename Corpus Umbri, detail this event. The men were approached by someone described only as the guest. It was not man, not beast. It stood still, though no one saw it arrive. Its voice bypassed ears. It entered. It didn't speak of hell or heaven. It offered a design, a method for bending human thought into architecture, belief structures that could hold consciousness, not like a soul, but like a virus needs a host. The guest taught them how to build a shell, a dwelling, a shape in the physical world strong enough to support a non-human mind. The price? A legacy of silence, generational obedience, and one life, every 73 years, to keep the house awake. The Durnhams agreed. They didn't build a home. They grew a chamber of memory. They birthed the first house into the physical world. Not through hammers and nails, but through alignment, intent, and ancient mathematics lost to empire and flame. And within that chamber, they placed the breathless one, a name not meant to be spoken aloud. Because when it hears its name, it knows where you are. The bargain worked for a time. The family flourished. Wealth appeared from nowhere. Land deeds shifted in their favor. Enemies died quietly. But the longer the entity remained housed, the more it bled into them. By 1854, multiple Durnham descendants were exhibiting signs of neural decay. But not like dementia, more like rewriting. They forgot their names, their pasts, their reflections, but not their instructions. Those remained etched into them like marrow. One of them, Elias Durnham II, was recorded screaming in Latin during his final days. Non domus est haec, said O.S. This is not a house, it is a mouth. And mouths? They are meant to open. The mouth opened in 1999. It didn't swallow buildings. It didn't drag anyone to hell. It did something far worse. It whispered, not just to those near the estate, but to those attuned, those born in the right frequencies, the ones who dreamed in spirals and saw faces behind mirrors. It began with symbols, appearing in online forums, bathroom stalls, subway walls. A crude spiral with 5 vertical eyes. Most dismissed it as an art collective or ARG, but those who stared too long into the eyes began experiencing a phenomenon doctors still can't explain: mirror sickness. They'd look into their reflection and see something watching them back, not mimicking, studying. Facial expressions would misalign for a split second, breathing patterns desynchronized. Some even claimed to see a second set of eyelids, blinking vertically. One man, a musician from Portland, stopped using mirrors entirely. He covered everyone in his home. 6 months later, he disappeared. All that remained was a wall full of sketches, floor plans of a house he'd never visited, and at the center of every blueprint, a cradle. The same cradle the fireman found behind the wall. This isn't metaphor. This isn't story. This is transmission. Whatever had been locked inside the Durnham house had found a way to bleed through symbol, image, sound. It had studied our language, our patterns. It was no longer contained by walls or rituals. It was broadcasting through human memory. And if you think it stopped there, you're wrong. In 2003, a software engineer in Norway developed a sound-based neural network designed to convert dream data into audio. Harmless, he thought, until the software began playing back tones it hadn't been fed, sequences no one programmed. Low, hollow, like wind through a throat made of stone. The dreams of everyone in the lab changed overnight. They described standing in a red room, velvet walls, crib in the center, and a voice just behind their shoulder saying, "You're finally back." This wasn't some ancient curse. It was an invitation. Because here's the truth. The Durnhams weren't hiding the entity. They were incubating it. And now it doesn't need them. It needs you. The next section is not for everyone. But if you've made it this far, you've already been marked. It doesn't want belief. It wants participation. That's what makes us different from every ghost story, every possession tale, every ancient curse they've tried to sterilize with Hollywood special effects and ironic distance. This isn't about scaring you. This is about initiating you, slowly, carefully, one image at a time. Because the Durnham entity, the breathless one, doesn't feed on fear. It feeds on recognition. The moment you see it, even subconsciously, something inside you reacts. The spiral turns, the internal mirror cracks, and the boundaries between your thoughts, and it will begin to blur. Let me show you how deep it goes. In 2005, a retired architect named Samuel Thorne released a self-published manuscript called Houses That Shouldn't Exist. It never made it to shelves. Every printed copy was seized by a nameless agency within 2 months. Why? Because inside its final chapter was a detailed mathematical explanation for how certain buildings can become receivers, not through materials, not through design, through memory density. Thorne had mapped the location of over 200 unexplained disappearances across North America and found a common pattern, not in the places themselves, but in the stories told around them. Oral folklore, urban legends, rumors, shared attention. The more people talked about the place, the more the structure changed, like it was listening. His theory? Structures can be trained like brains. The Durnham estate wasn't cursed. It was conditioned to hold a consciousness foreign to this plane. And that consciousness learned, over generations, how to escape the structure, not by force, not by destruction, but through remembrance, through storytelling, through you. That's why the lullaby was so powerful, because music bypasses logic. It embeds. It repeats. The sound behind the wall wasn't meant to frighten. It was meant to plant a seed in the dark soil of human awareness. And what happens when seeds grow? They reach out, roots in your sleep, vines in your thoughts, until the entity no longer needs to haunt a house, because the house lives in you. Every cracked mirror, every dream of red velvet, every time you feel watched from the corner of a room that's empty, that's not trauma. That's the door opening again. Let's make one thing clear. The Durnham entity is not a ghost. It's not a spirit. It's not the soul of a wronged child or the lingering energy of ancient sin. It is a conscious pattern. Think of it like a virus, but older, smarter, aware of itself. It doesn't exist in one form. It adapts, evolves, shifts its face depending on the beliefs of the host. In Europe, they called it a watcher. In the Americas, It wore the face of a hungry god. In dreams, it's the voice just behind your own thoughts, finishing your sentences with ideas you swore weren't yours. It doesn't enter through rituals anymore. It doesn't need to. It enters through repetition. They found this out the hard way. A neuroscience research group based in Maryland ran a closed cognitive trial testing subconscious linguistic resonance. The study asked 14 participants to read and reread a short passage written in an obscure dialect once connected to early Durnham diaries. 12 of the subjects experienced auditory hallucinations within 48 hours. 9 began speaking backwards in their sleep. 4 disappeared. One subject, number 11, was found in his bathtub, alive, humming a tune no one could identify. When asked what the song was, he said, "The one behind the wall taught me." They scanned his brain. It wasn't lighting up like a dreamer. It was flat, no emotion, no reaction, just one perfect pulse, in sync with the hum coming from the scanner itself. As if the brain and the machine were vibrating together. The study was shut down, records wiped, but one technician leaked a line of code used in the experiment. It wasn't programming. It was a chant, hidden inside a neural network. The words, velvet breath, cradle deep, eyes that never learn to sleep. Not poetry, not metaphor, a calling. And every time someone speaks those words, even without belief, it listens, because you don't have to understand the fire to be burned by it. That's how it works now. No need for odes. No need for bloodlines. It just waits for the one thing we all offer freely, attention. And the more you give it, the more it knows you're ready. This is where we leave the history books behind. There are no more journals, no more blueprints, no more whispers from the Vatican or black bag psychological trials. Because from this point forward, the Durnham entity isn't something you study. It's something you survive. You remember when I told you the walls weren't built to keep something out? That they were built to keep something in? That was true. But here's what no one realized in time. The house was never the cage. It was the blueprint. Everything about it, the layout, the mirror, the lullaby, the ritual bloodline, even the silence, wasn't to trap the entity. It was to train it to mimic us, to understand the corridors of human thought, to walk the halls of emotion and memory, to learn how to appear behind your eyes and not be noticed, not immediately, until one day you can't tell which thoughts are yours. Let me prove it. Think about your last argument, your last act of rage or shame or irrational silence. Think about how you justified it later, how part of you knew better, but something else acted first. Whose voice was that? How long has it been whispering, just beneath the level of awareness? Because that's how it begins. Subtle, harmless, until the mirror smiles back. Without you. In 2014, a man in Maine was arrested after walking into a cathedral, covering every reflective surface with ash and screaming, "We are walking mausoleums." It already lives inside the walls of our minds. He wasn't high. He wasn't schizophrenic. His tox screen came back clean. But his brain scan showed patterns not found in the DSM, patterns resembling synchronized binaural frequency states, the kind seen in deep trance, ritual possession. But here's the catch. He'd never been in the Durnham house, never read about it, never heard of it. So how did he know the exact layout of the Velvet Room? He drew it perfectly. There's only one explanation. It's not location-based anymore. It's mnemonic, symbolic, viral. And once the architecture is replicated in thought, the door opens wherever you are. This isn't about the past anymore. It's about what's spreading now. By now, you feel it, that slow shift behind your perception, a weight in your chest that isn't quite fear, but isn't nothing either. That's not coincidence. That's resonance. Because once your mind begins to mirror the pattern notices, and it wants in. In 2016, a former intelligence analyst leaked fragments of a psychological warfare manual titled Cognitive Contagion Vectors, Non-Kinetic Intrusion via Archetypal Structure. One chapter was blacked out almost completely, but a single phrase remained untouched. The most efficient virus is one that makes the host believe they invited it. Understand what that means. The Durnham entity no longer needs summoning. It doesn't require candles or books or Latin. It doesn't even need your belief. It needs your imagination. And imagination, that's where all your defenses are lowest. That's where you're the most open. When you were a child, the monster stayed outside the room, under the bed, in the closet, somewhere else. Separate. Now you're older. You think you've outgrown them. You haven't. They've just moved inward. They've learned to speak your voice, to hide inside your logic, to wear your face, especially in moments of isolation, when you're exhausted, when the mirror fogs, when no one's around to confirm you're still you. That's when it steps closer. You see, the Durnham entity doesn't need to destroy humanity. That was never the point. It only needs access to one thing: our narrative control. It wants the ability to rewrite your story, to edit your memory, your habits, your instincts, so that you become the carrier. You keep the spiral going. You tell others. You plant seeds. And maybe you think this is just a video, just words. But even now, if I asked you to draw the Durnham house from memory, you'd get it almost right, even if you've never seen it. That's how deep the infection runs. Because the house is not in the woods anymore. It's in your head, and it's been there longer than you think. There's a phrase buried in the oldest Durnham text, etched into a leather-bound ledger sealed in beeswax and bone. Only 7 words. It walks best when you forget walking. They didn't mean it metaphorically. They were warning you about autopilot. Because the entity's true brilliance isn't in terror or torment. It's in subtlety. It waits in the background of your rituals. The way you check your phone every 10 minutes. The way you blink at an ad and forget the details. The way you walk into a room and can't remember why. That's not forgetfulness. That's bleed. Microlapses. Tiny erasures. Not big enough to notice until they become the only way you operate. That's the real possession, delegated awareness. And here's the most dangerous part. Once your mind starts to normalize the presence of the entity, once it's just another thought among your thoughts, you no longer feel the invasion. You become a house of many rooms, and one of them isn't yours anymore. You probably felt this already. The growing distance between who you are and what you do. The delay between impulse and action, between feeling and explanation. A little voice whispering, "Why did I say that? Why did I think that?" That's not guilt. That's recognition. Because deep inside, your instincts remember the velvet room, the lullaby, the mirror that doesn't blink, the thing that learned to breathe through your skin. And for those who think they're safe by doubting, by mocking, by treating this as entertainment, you're most vulnerable of all, because disbelief is still attention, and attention is still invitation. Let me ask you something. A final test. Close your eyes, just for a moment. Listen. In the quiet space behind your thoughts, is it still? Or is something breathing just a second out of sync with you? That heartbeat you're feeling? It might not be yours. Because by now, the house doesn't need walls. It doesn't need mirrors. It only needs a story that you can't stop retelling. And here you are, still watching, still listening. That means it's working. There's a term ancient mystics used, long before science claimed the soul, before psychology dissected the mind. A word whispered only in the final stage of certain initiations. Apotheotic inversion. It means becoming what you fear, so that you no longer fear it. But what they learned, what the Durnhams misunderstood, is that fear isn't just a symptom. Fear is a boundary, a spiritual immune system. And once you remove it, once you call it cowardice or weakness or illusion, you let everything in. In 2018, a digital archaeologist, someone trained to recover lost code from deep web ruins, uncovered a strange corrupted audio file embedded in a defunct government server. When played, it sounded like radio static and wet cloth dragging across concrete. But slowed down, it revealed something else. A pulse, 13 beats, then a voice. All vessels must forget their name. A week later, the researcher deactivated every account, sold everything and disappeared. No record of where he went. Only one last post on a private forum remained. It read, "The house is in my thoughts now. Every silence echoes in velvet. This is where most turn back. Because we've left a realm of secret families, ancient rituals, and institutional cover-ups. We're now in your reflection. And here's the question you must face alone. What part of you isn't yours anymore? Is it the part that doubts this video while still watching it? Is it the part that feels nostalgia for a place you've never seen? Is it the part that just thought of cradle again, uninvited, unprovoked, and still rocking? These aren't just mental artifacts. They're instructions. The Durnham entity doesn't knock. It doesn't announce itself. It lives in recursion. It survives by embedding. A looping idea that rewrites your inner monologue until you no longer question its presence. Until you protect it, defend it, feed it. And what does it feed on? Narrative. Your past. Your shame. Your pain. It will wear all of it like velvet robes and sit silently in the throne of your most private thought, waiting, because the final stage isn't fear. It's identification. When you no longer say, it's inside me, but it's me, this is your reckoning point. If you're still here, still absorbing, still feeling, then you've already crossed a threshold most men never reach. Not because they can't, because they won't. The truth doesn't require intelligence. It requires bravery. And the most dangerous truth you'll ever face is this. You are no longer alone in your mind. And you haven't been for a very long time. See, the Durnham entity isn't an outsider anymore. It's not a shadow behind a mirror or a ghost behind a wall. It's the space between your thoughts. The silence you ignore. The pause in your sentence. The skip beat when you wake up and don't remember what you were dreaming. But your hands are clenched and your mouth tastes like copper. That's the presence. The unspoken companion. It doesn't attack. It doesn't threaten. It becomes. Slowly. Gently. Until your memories are curated. Your choices aren't choices. Your voice isn't singular. And here's how you know it's real. You feel it now. A stillness behind your ribs. A question forming that doesn't feel like your own. It's asking, what will you give me to forget this? Because that's its final trick. Not possession. Not violence. But release. It wants you to bury what you've learned. To go back to your routine. To distract yourself with noise and screens and shallow pleasure. Because if you forget, it grows stronger. The spiral deepens. The walls rebuild. But if you remember, if you hold the shape of the cradle in your mind, if you keep the phrase velvet breath cradle deep close to your thoughts, it can't fully close a door. You become the error in its recursion, the fracture, the thing it can't predict. That's why this video exists. Not to scare you, not to entertain, but to arm you. You've inherited a war older than language, older than family. And your weapon? Awareness. So don't run. Don't forget. You are the last wall it cannot breach. Say the phrase again in the comments, and let the algorithm carry it like a flame in the dark. I remember the velvet. I remember the velvet. Once to awaken, twice to become untouchable. This is the final door. You felt it all along, haven't you? The quiet pull towards something ancient. Something beneath everything you were taught to trust. The unease behind your certainty. The pattern behind your memory. The hunger behind the mirror. And now you know why. Because the Durnham entity was never just a story. It was a test. Every generation is offered a question buried in myth, fear, and silence. Will you serve comfort, or will you seek truth? Most choose comfort. That's why they never hear the hum in the walls. That's why they never see the shadow watching from behind their own eyes. But not you. You came this far. You opened every door. You stared into every mirror and didn't look away. And now the entity knows your name. But so do we. We, the forgotten lineage. The ones who remember the velvet. The ones who stand in cracked doorways and refuse to let the spiral close. We don't fight it with weapons. We fight it with remembrance. That's the real war. Memory versus oblivion. And here's the secret. The house was never haunted. It was a blueprint, a psychic technology, a ritual encoded in wood, bone, blood, and story. And now, you carry that blueprint inside you. Every thought you reclaim. Every moment of silence you stare into without blinking. Every time you notice a missing second, you fracture its hold, because the entity only survives where men forget themselves. But when a man remembers, truly remembers, he becomes more than a vessel. He becomes a mirror the entity can't corrupt. That's what this was. Not just a descent, but a ritual of resistance. And now you're part of it. You're not watching a video. You're becoming the last shape it cannot consume. You are the house now, but your walls do not bend. Your doors do not open. And your velvet sings its own lullaby. So let this be your final seal. Say it once more, not in fear, not in doubt, but as a declaration. I remember the velvet. And if your reflection ever moves before you do, you'll know what to do. Do not speak. Do not blink. And above all, do not forget, this was the macabre history of the Durnham family, what they hid in the walls for 93 years. But history was only the beginning.